And this is the last lecture of our ongoing series of this season, our ongoing series in the art of architecture, where we invite really great architects and designers who are doing projects in the community to come and share what they do. And tonight is very special because when we reached out to José, we didn't know that he also had a book that he had just published that happened to be called By Your Beach. So I guess resurrection spirits were watching over us. But José Gelabert-Navia is an architect, teacher, and artist. He resides in Miami, Florida, and he has over 40 years of experience as an architect and is also regional director for Latin America of Perkins+Will, which is one of the great architectural firms. He's also a professor of architecture and formerly dean of architectural for the School of Architecture at the University of Miami. He's a graduate of Cornell University, and he primarily focuses on architectural design and history of colonialism and globalization in architecture. For those who love Italy, he was also founder of the U.S. School of Architecture's Rome program and teaches a course in Italian culture and has authored many publications. He is the son of two architects. So he's been immersed in architecture since his birth. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming José.
Thank you. I really appreciate you coming, and I very much appreciate Daniel and the Miami Design Preservation League for inviting me to give this presentation. As Daniel said, originally he approached me about talking about the architecture, and then, as he said, it so happened that I had just come out with a new book on Miami Beach, and you're welcome to see the book. It's sort of a different type of book. I had done a book on Cuba a few years ago, my first trip to Cuba in 56 years of absence, and the book was in this very beautiful box, and then the publisher had decided to put an insert with 5 original drawings in it. And more than one person told me, you know, I love the book, but the 2 things that I love the most about the book was the box and the 5 drawings. Oh, we love the rest of it too, but those 2 things. So then I told the publisher, and the publisher said, why don't we do a book that has a nice box and then has 20 drawings? So it's worked out very well. I did 3 books. First, one on China, another one on Taos, and then a third one on Italy. And the Italy one was mostly Venice and Sicily. And the books, you know, sold pretty well. And then actually I did a presentation in Books and Books, and Mitchell said, you know, you should do a book on our hometown. It would do very well. So we decided. I did a book on, these 3 have just come out, one on Coral Gables, which the villagers, sort of, I guess, MDPL's version in Coral Gables and the Grove, supported the book, and the book has sold. We've done a few presentations and it's done pretty well. And then last week I did a presentation in Books and Books of the Book of Rome, which is actually I spent the half of the fall semester with my students in a program, as Daniel said, that I had started in Rome. And thanks to MDPL, I'm doing this presentation tonight on the Miami Beach book. So I hope you like it. I'm gonna start talking first a little bit about the architecture, since that was the original invite, and then I'll talk about the drawings. Um, as Daniel said, I've been part of Perkins+Will for the last 27 years. Perkins+Will is a firm that was started in the 1930s in Chicago. And in 1996, a friend of mine called me and said that Perkins+Will is going to open an office in Miami. So could you give us, some names of people to talk to? And I said, why don't you talk to me? And it was totally unexpected. This was on a Friday afternoon. Anyway, to make a long story short, I went to Cornell, and both Perkins and Will went to Cornell. They did a number of buildings in Cornell, so I knew a lot about the firm, so I thought, wow, this is great. And fast forward 27 years later, we now have an office of 55 people, and I'll show you just the buildings that we've done in Miami Beach. But we also put out a book of the first 25 years of Perkins+Will, which was something that was also pretty personal. Because when I joined Perkins+Will, my wife, who is a lawyer, had been part of several big law firms in town as a partner. I said, what do you think? And she said, I think it's a great opportunity, but I don't want you to be deluded. There was a Perkins+Will before you came in, and there will be a Perkins+Will after you leave. And it will always be called Perkins+Will. Your name will not be on the marquee. However, if you take it as a platform for doing work, it's a great platform. So we've done a number of buildings, and in a few years I won't be part of Perkins+Will, but I wanted, frankly, for our daughter to record what her dad had been doing for all this time. So we put out this book, which is only of the buildings we've done here, and it's called Perkins+Will Miami. So my name is still not on the marquee, but at least Miami is. But the second half of this presentation, I'm going to talk about this book on Miami Beach. I've always drawn, as I was telling a gentleman before the presentation, he asked me, do you do the renderings for the firm? And I said, no, I don't do renderings. Frankly, now everything's with computers, so no one wants hand drawings anymore. So these are things I do for myself. My life in the university, where I've been teaching for 42 years now, I've always taught design and history. And I used to give a series of lectures on Miami Beach. And in fact, years ago, I think before Daniel's time, I also used to give tours of Ocean Drive. So I've always been, I am not by any means, I'm sure half of the people in the audience know better Miami Beach than I do, but I'll try my hand. But one of the things that I've always been fascinated, and it's where a lot of I think to understand what is going on, what has happened in the Miami Beach of the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, and which is the only part I'm going to talk about, is the relationship between New York City, New Jersey, and Miami Beach. And I always have said that the architecture in Miami Beach, is sort of the Art Deco of the minor key. It is not the great, Art Deco buildings that we know. On the other hand, there is no place in terms of the concentration, as we all know, of Art Deco buildings as Miami Beach. but it also reflects a time in here. And even though now we go to Ocean Drive and we have, the very ritzy hotels, and when I first came to Miami in 1981, walking down Miami Beach, there still was, well, one of the people that I am now, one of the old people like me now, that would be on their rockers on the porches of the house. So I knew it when Barbara Capitman and Michael Kinnert and others were saving it. And again, part of the thing was, again, to understand who were the people that commissioned these hotels and who were the people that designed them. So I actually met Perkins. Phil Will died in the 70s. But Larry Perkins died when he was 95. So I was actually able to meet him. And actually, they had done a number of buildings in Florida before I came. Mostly, Perkins+Will was known for educational buildings, schools and hospitals. And it has taken me a while, but when I used to go and say, well, I'm heading the office of Perkins+Will, people would say, oh, that's the firm from Chicago that does schools. And I would say, yes, we do schools, but we're here now. But now, 27 years later, now nobody says Chicago. And we have people that have been with us for most of the time that I've been here, which it makes me very proud. But our very first project was actually the Winter Haven. Of course, all the buildings I'm going to show you, I was not the original architect, obviously. But we restored the Winter Haven when we first came. Actually, our client wanted to turn it, it was going to be the first hotel under the Tommy Bahama brand. And I love the Tommy Bahama shirts, and I wear them over the weekends. But the whole idea of turning this into a Tommy Bahama hotel, which would have been a very different look, was something that I was trying to avoid. It was actually a very interesting experience because they came because of Miami Vice. They really didn't understand it too much. There was even a fight because they wanted to change the name. And my friend William Carey said, well, you can't change the name. Well, eventually they put, I think it was a Fairmont or something, but they had to keep the name, at least in the entry. And it's still, as you can see, they had to keep the name on the marquee. But they eventually, the original Tommy Bahama people never came. And instead it was bought by William Simon, the former Secretary of the Treasury, a long time ago. But this was a sort of a limited experience because the beach hadn't taken off like it has right now. So they were only willing to spend so much on it. But we managed to do, put a different bar, fix the original entry. Originally, some of you might remember, this thing in here had been a taco stand that they had put in the lobby there. I mean, completely was like a little cheeky hut. So we got rid of that. And again, they wanted to get rid of panels in there. And we saved them. We saved the terrazzo. And these are old pictures. I hope it still looks like that.
Right now.
It's being redone. Oh. Oops. But our first real effort here was actually the Victor Hotel. And when we first got involved with the Victor, And again, some of you might remember Craig Robbins had bought the building. And when we first got involved and our client bought the building, all the windows were out. All the interiors were gutted. And actually, all the different floors were full of pigeons. Rain came in through. It was, Craig had sold it. And so it was in pretty bad shape. But Craig had originally commissioned a very well-known architect, Carlos Zapata, who did the Publix a few blocks away from here, and Carlos away from here. And Carlos had actually proposed a building that lined up with Victor on Ocean Drive. And I told the owner I would make it. He had an L, but the L going the other way. And I said, if you put it in the front, it's going to compete with the building. Why don't we put it in the back? And he agreed. It was a long process. The building there on the left, I'll show you more pictures of it. But we went through a whole history of trying to understand where the building came from. Alan Schulman was one of my colleagues in the university, helped us research some of the original images, the famous mule, and then I'll tell you a fun story. So these were all the original pictures of the victor. So we went there and I thought, wow, this is really amazing. Then the owner hired an interior designer from France, very well-known, called Christian Liegre. Christian Liegre, really amazing. Then the owner hired an interior designer from France, very well-known, called Christian Liegre. Christian Liegre is primarily known for this gorgeous furniture that he does, but the reason he came into the project was twofold. First, the owner thought that Perkins+Will was not known as an interior design firm, so he needed someone with more name than we had. He also wanted Calvin Klein to design all the towels, all the everything that was cloth. And Calvin Klein had been ignoring him. But when he said that Christian Liegre was going to design the interiors, Calvin Klein agreed to do it. So Christian Liegre was brought on board, and I remember the owner decided to help, with me, win over historic preservation over here in Miami Beach. So he set up a dinner in the Delano. That's when Madonna had just opened Blue. And he set up a dinner with Christian Liegre, William Carey, who was then the head of historic preservation, and Tom Mooney. So we're sitting over for dinner, and this guy was the caricature, or is, because he's still alive, of the arrogant Frenchman. So he spoke English, but he refused to speak English to William and Tom, who spoke no French. So I speak French, so I was translating. So we're having dinner, and Christian's speaking to me in French. I'm translating to William and Tom. And William gives him this whole history of the Art Deco district, of the buildings, everything. And Christian looks at me and says, "This is not Art Deco. Art Deco is," he had restored the house of Malay Stevens in Paris, which was one of the great originators of Art Deco. He said, and he's telling me in French, he said, "This is not Art Deco, this is kitsch." So William and Tom look at me and says, "What did he say?" And I am wondering, the whole dinner has been set up to win him over. So I said, he says that, William, that he's really enjoyed your presentation on the district, and he's very excited about the project. So we had another meeting, and anyway, he goes over, we do all the plans, we design the addition here, which we wanted to be respectful to the victor, but if you look closely, obviously it's not the same, which is the way you're supposed to be doing it. So he brings in the interiors, and we present before, at this point, it was, I forget why we had to go to the city commission, but we went, and as we presented, and he shows the drawings that he's made, and I realized that in the lobby, the terrazzo has been completely covered in wood, which is one of his trademarks. All the light fixtures are gone. And then I said, "Where's the mural?" And then I noticed in his drawings that the mural was in front of the bathrooms. And I said to the owner, because he sent the drawings a couple of days ahead, I said, "This is not going to fly." Yes.
I was on the design review board at that time, and all I can remember is I think you came before us a couple of times. We didn't do well. I think the board in general liked it. Sometimes the boards deny or, pick. But I remember we liked the final design we came up with, and it wasn't too much problem there.
Well, the final was not him, because what happened is that what happened is I told the owner, I am not presenting this because this is going to be turned down. And the owner got mad with me, and he said, "You have a fiduciary duty with me to present it." So I said, "Okay, I will present it, but I will disclose that I did not do it." So we presented, and we got turned down 5-0. And then when we left, he said he's going to have to change it. So he calls Christian, and he says, "You have to change the design." And Christian said, "Did you read my contract?" And he said, "Yes." "What about it?" He said, "There is a clause that says I have final say on everything in the design." And he said, well, so he fired him. So then the second designer, which is the one that did this, that was actually a wonderful story. There was a guy, his name is Jacques Garcia, and Jacques Garcia also came with a design without ever having been in Ocean Drive. And he presented to our client, and our client looked at it, and the guy he's an extraordinary interior designer. And he left at lunch and said, "I'm going to take a walk around Ocean Drive and come back after lunch." And when he left, the owner looks at me and says, "I don't know how to tell him, but this thing in here doesn't fit at all. And we're not going to be able to, but how do I tell him? He's such a nice man, but I want him to just go home." And so Jacques came back and said, "I've walked around Ocean Drive, and I've realized that everything I did was wrong. So let me take my drawings." He got them out of the room, and he said, "I'll tell you what you need to do." And then he borrowed a large piece of paper. And this has been one of the most extraordinary experiences I've had as an architect. And he said, as you come into the lobby of the hotel, this is what you see. And he began drawing the whole lobby. And he said, and as you come in, you see the light fixtures that were there already. And he said, I saw them. And he drew them exactly the way. And you know, the chandelier, there was only one left. And we're going to restore the other two. And, you know, so it took him about 20 minutes, but he drew the lobby as it is in this picture, which is no longer the way it is anymore. But at the end of that drawing, the owner said, that's it. We're doing that. And he was the one that, again, initiated a lot of the nice restoration, and he had done some wonderful interiors for the addition, which are no longer there. And then, but so this is the new part, and actually the owner wanted a pool like the Rally, so we did a version of the Rally. So again, it was a great experience. I also, around that time, did, this is quite unusual because I've done 3 houses for the same client. The first 2 are in Palm Island, which I was telling Daniel, one of the most amazing things about Miami. I did this house in the 1990s, and the other day I drove to Palm Island and to see how the house looked now. And all of a sudden, I thought, I'm in the wrong lot. And then I realized, I called my client, I said, Marty, I think they tore down your house. And he said, yes, they did. The new owner is now building a much larger house, and they tore it down. So thankfully, I have some photographs left. But he sold it. And then I did another house for him practically across the street. And this might not seem like a lot like Miami Beach, but I've always been captivated by the architecture of Southeast Asia. And actually the weather is quite similar to ours. And it's a unique combination of, to me, the architecture is coming out of there, but at the same time regionalism, which is what I do in my classes. So I convinced Dr. Madorsky to his second house to do this, and I actually got him so excited about the whole thing that he and his wife actually went to Bali and spent some time there, and brought 3 containers full of things, including this very, very long piece of wood that they made into a table. And the house, the new owner loves every inch of it. It's not so crazy about the wood because of the maintenance, but he loves it. So, and that was sort of the last house I was able to do with Perkins+Will, because Perkins+Will doesn't really do houses. And I got away with it because I was running the office. So I was able to. So a few years ago, this actually started out as a regular office building, and then Baptist Hospital took over the building. It's in 709 Alton Road, and this too went through a long, probably not that interested in the plans, but we actually, there was no building there. There's a duplex apartments over on this side, but it's a very, very tight and compact building. Actually, the developer that I'm sure all of you know, Russell Galbert, we actually believe it or not, got Russell to do a whole model of Alton Road because he owned half of it. But the interesting thing about the design is Russell already had a design for the building. So I met him on a Thursday, and I heard that he was doing this, and he said, will you give us a chance to do the building? And he said, I'll tell you what, I'll pay you $5,000, and I'll give you till Tuesday. And on Tuesday, if you bring me a design, and I'm going to take it to the City of Miami Beach Planning Department, and I have 2 other designs. Whichever one they like best, that's the one I'm going to build, because I can't go through the approval process again, which he has, of course. But fortunately, the city liked our design, and again, it's very compact. There's a ground medical offices, including a couple of operating rooms on the ground floor, 2 levels of parking, and then the last level is physician's office, and the top floor, which again, we were able to convince Russell, thankfully the city, that's the design they liked. I'm not sure Russell would have built the trellis and the garden otherwise, but it does have this big concrete trellis, the garden behind, and we actually had a half level on the side. And those of you who've been there, there is a wellness center, which was always planned for that, but Baptist uses it as a rehab facility. I'm sorry this one was never done. The city had an RFP in Washington Avenue to develop, there's a city-owned parking lot behind it. There's another building here on the side, and then we work with Michael Simpkins, who owns the building on the side, and we had designed a hotel with a ground floor of the bank. And we actually won. It was sort of an invited RFP. We won the competition, but Michael could never get Bank of America to leave their lease. So it was never done. And also with Russell, we worked on what they call 1212 Lincoln Road, even though it is Alton Road. And most of what you see there is ours. Eventually, the hotel was done by another firm. But basically, the city would not, thankfully, allow them to change the original design that much. So they have sort of adhered. But I'm going to show you our design. So there is 2 levels of retail. Again, now you can see the real building, and 3 levels of hotel called Citizen M. And then this was the part facing actually Lincoln Road. And again, all these things they've kept of the original design. And what is beginning to go up right now, or it's up, but it hasn't reached its full impact, is the grand stair that brings together the parking garage on one side and the hotel in the other. One of the things about Citizen M is that, and the reason they got a variance to put smaller units than normal, is that their food and beverage program is the city. They don't have restaurants inside. So the idea, and what it's going to happen is the practice, people are going to have to go out of the hotel, whether it's to Lincoln Road or to the building for eating. This originally, the the building on the side where the parking is was going to be an open retail with a 2-level high, and which again eventually got simplified. And a few years ago too, we won the RFP for the addition to the Miami Beach City Hall. And I know that the reason we won this, this is a 600-car parking garage. And really the RFP was for that. And we decided to put a liner on the building, which the original intent of the liner was that it was going to be residential. But the city loved the idea, but they said we can't put residential because we can't be landlords. On the other hand, we can have an annex for offices for City Hall. But the idea of the liner was, as you know, that which is in Meridian faces residential on the other side. And I'm sure the residents would not have appreciated looking at a parking structure. This was a crude drawing of what we originally proposed, but it's pretty much it. You have City Hall, the building, and then working with Barry Miller, we did the park, little park that brings the two together. And we designed, originally it was more exciting, but we're still pretty proud of it. The screens around the part that faces City Hall were quite complex. Originally, the flaps moved, these flaps and there moved, and then the city said, no, you can't have that because we're going to have people crashing because they're going to be distracted. So now, but still, it was a nice screen, and the building actually has held up pretty well over the years. So we designed a number of other buildings. These are our buildings in Miami Beach, which by and large MDPL has been supportive of, even though 2 of them have been for Russell. So over the years, again, I had been drawing and I knew a lot of these buildings, and I had a teacher who still is alive, that when we went to him with him in Italy, he said one of the bad things about photography, and now it's even made worse by having cameras in your phones, is that people record everything but they remember nothing. So he used to insist that we draw, and what I have found is that even though a lot of these drawings are from photographs, my photographs, but it really stays in, because if I spend 10 hours doing a drawing, I remember the building. If I take 5 seconds taking a photo, maybe less. So I gave a lecture on Coral Gables, and a lot of the early Coral Gables architects, also some of them like Phineas Paste, had actually gone to Europe and had drawn all the great buildings that people used to do with a grand tour. And then eventually they started working for Merrick doing the buildings. So I said, let me look at drawings from the Miami Beach architects. And I hardly found any. The drawings that I found were usually professional renderings that were done to publicize or sell the book, or sell the buildings, not really the architects themselves drawing. I did find this even though Sheldon Tucker did this. And this building is not in Miami Beach. But this was a very important building for Art Deco in the United States, and it was done by Robert Lawweed, who became a very important architect, doing all sorts of he did great Mediterranean buildings. He also did great Art Deco buildings, and he designed this quite early in his career. But this is actually in Illinois. It's not, so it's not, the tropical house is not exactly in a tropical environment. And again, and I'm sure folks here probably know more about this, and they will tell me, I can show you a lot of drawings by so-and-so and so-and-so. I wasn't able to find many, but I did find this drawing by Henry Hohauser. This is actually his drawing, not drawn by a renderer. And Hohauser, as you know, had done many of the buildings in here. But it sort of brings me back a little bit about the first slide that I showed you, about the nature of these architects. Most of these architects were from New York or New Jersey, or in the case of Albert Anis, was from Chicago, who came here, and these were, as we all know, originally seasonal hotels. So it was not that these were the most famous architects of the period, but frankly were people who were here to make a living. And a lot of the work that they did was really catering to the Jewish population from New York and New Jersey who was vacationing here. People that would go during the summer months to Grossinger's and then would come to Miami Beach in the winter months. In fact, one of the hotels was owned by the Grossinger family. And so, and again, he actually was not born here, spent most of his career here, but eventually moved up north again. This is a postcard. This is not by Anis. And actually, I was able to, like I said, there must be drawings by Lapidus. But most of the drawings were, again, renderings done by professional renderers. But this is actually one of the first drawings of the Fontainebleau in 1952, which Lapidus did. And from the looks of it, he should have done more, or at least maybe we should have saved more, because it's a wonderful drawing. When I was the dean of the school, I invited Lapidus to come to talk to our students. And it was actually a funny experience because he spent the whole time complaining why we had never invited him before. And he said, I've been around for a long time, and you guys had never had the courtesy to invite me here before. And so he was not all that pleasant with me that day, or maybe not with the school. But anyway, I'm just going to show you sort of a show and tell of the buildings that, again, you know pretty well. There you have the Century, Hohauser Century, and the Berkeley Shore. And one of the things I wanted to do with the drawings, you know, we know that the colors are a recent addition. And I remember when Philip Stark came for the Delano, and he said it was going to be black and white. And they said, well, what about the colors? And he said these buildings were not original in color. There's Leonard Horowitz who was responsible for it. So I wanted to, besides the fact, as my wife reminds me, I don't have a great sense of color. So the drawings were largely black and white. The Gale Hotel by Murray Dixon, who with Hohauser was probably the most active architect in the area. And these were a couple of drawings I did on the Gale, which actually I gave the one on the left to Russell, who owns the hotel, and actually has done a nice job with the restoration. I'm sure with a lot of prodding from Daniel. Again, the Henry Nelson's Beacon Hotel, and Ines, the Waldorf Tower. These drawings, I love the size of the screen here. I was telling Daniel that usually I project smaller, but it's great to see them this big. But the drawings are actually about 8 by 10, about the size that they appear in the book. And the drawings are all done with a felt tip marker on watercolor paper and with a brush. This is one of my favorite buildings here, the post office. And I've done many drawings of the post office. And this is interesting because I'll show you 2 drawings of Hoffman's cafeteria. But as I began to look for the pictures, there's Hoffman's as the famous deli, Hoffman as Senor Frogs. So I actually finally called Debbie Tackett in the Historic Preservation Office, and I said, what was the original building? And she said, that was Hoffman Cafeteria from 1940. And this is actually one of my favorite of all of them. And the Cardozo, the Carlisle, and the Edison Hotel. And actually, I've always thought that Richard Keenel, who did the Carlisle, was probably the best architect that Miami had in the 1920s and 30s. He died in 1940, and that was another case of losing a lot of drawings. Keenel had no children, and when he died, his wife packed all belongings that they had in her car, their car, and just went up north. Keenel, unlike the other architects, he was actually German. He had studied in the Beaux-Arts, and he had started out as an architect in Pittsburgh. I didn't know this until one of my colleagues in the university, Ari Milas, who did a lot of work here in the beach, documenting buildings, who was from Pittsburgh, said, Keenel did a number of buildings in Pittsburgh, except that they were all Tudor revival buildings. But he came here in 1917 because he did a house for John Bindley, who was the head of Pittsburgh Steel, which is now the Carrollton School. And I had an opportunity to restore the next house he did just down the street in Main Highway. But Keenel really was the person, I think, responsible for the Mediterranean revival here, the one who really, and the buildings are high quality. And then in the 30s, 41 was built, but he designed it before then. He does the Carlisle Hotel. So anyway, in Berkeley Shore, and with his just gorgeous staff. And then I said that Keenel was the best architect since the 40s. To me, one of the great architects of the 50s and 60s and 70s was Igor Polovitsky,
who did a number of the best hotels here in the 40s and 50s.
And actually in Havana, did, to me, my favorite hotel in Havana, which is the Riviera, which has recently been restored. I think he was, and I don't know this for a fact, but he obviously, some of the clients that he had here had some mob connections, including Mayor Lansky. In fact, I'm sure you've heard the story of the Riviera. The Riviera in Havana was originally going to be done by Philip Johnson. And Philip Johnson did a scheme for it and showed it to Lansky. And Lansky said, I don't like the design. You are going to have to modify it. And Johnson reputedly said, I'm not changing it. You have to take it like this. I don't know if he knew who he was dealing with.
Fortunately, he just left the job. But then Lansky turned to Polovitsky, who designed a great building, much nicer actually than the one Johnson had done. But then he was responsible for the Shelburne, which again, it seems my life here, Miami Beach is tied to Russell, not Tripp.
Who designed a great building, much nicer actually than the one Johnson had done. But then he was responsible for the Shelburne, which again, it seems my life here in Miami Beach is tied to Russell, not Tripp Russell, but Russell Galbert, because Russell also at one point owned the Shelburne. And as he reminded me, the pool is not original. These were added later, but still is a nice job. So I did a couple of drawings of the pool area and the extraordinary sign on it. And then I had a chance to revisit the Winter Haven a few years later, and maybe learned a few things along the way the second time around. And the National Hotel, that's where we had that great meeting with Jacques Garcia. I've always thought that this was one of the buildings that I used to sit also on the design review board and the historic preservation board in Miami Beach. And I remember when the project came up, it was actually one of the nicest restorations of the interiors that I had seen. And again, it stayed always close to my heart. And then the Delano that fortunately was saved. This is probably one of the later ones in my drawings. And as you all know, different generation of snowbirds that was coming down. Now, these are not the poor snowbirds. These are the wealthier snowbirds who began to turn the hotels into completely different period. And the last one I wanted to show you was Mary Dixon's Ritz Plaza. And in particular, I've done a number of drawings of it, but the thing that I've always loved was the tower itself. So again, wanted to share these few images. Like Scully said, you know, talking to my slides. I hope, you know, you have a chance. There's a few copies of the book, and which we have for sale, and part of the proceeds go to Miami Design Preservation League. So your support is their support. And as I said, it's become now probably one of the most special parts of my life, because now after I go to the places and I take the photographs, much to my wife's chagrin, because I spend hours and hours putting these together, but they basically record times. A lot of them are times spent with my students. The last one being the one of Rome, where I was teaching in the program that I started the fall of 23, and was able to actually spend 6 weeks in Rome. So thank you very much for coming. I hope you have enjoyed.
James, I think we have a few minutes for audience questions, depending on the audience have any questions.
Yes.
I have a question. Could you maybe explain or give us a hint as to the relationship between Bauhaus and Art Deco here in the United States?
I think probably I would say that Art Deco probably had more influence than the Bauhaus. It's curious because the Bauhaus starts before, and then, as I'm sure you know, most people here know, Art Deco, the name where it comes from, is the 1925 exposition of decorative arts in Paris. And the Bauhaus, obviously, over the long run, had a much greater influence. I think in the United States, it sort of came through, I think they come through two different sources. I think the Bauhaus, which eventually evolved into the international style, and then when in 1932, I think it was, that the Museum of Modern Art organized the exposition of the international style, and actually the term was coined by Henry Russell Hitchcock, who organized the show with Philip Johnson. And it introduced the work of all of those European architects to the United States, which really was known, but not that well known. And again, part of the thing was that America's greatest architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, was actually kept out of the, I don't think by any design, it just didn't fit. But he was not part of the show. But it introduced all these people. And then a lot of the people that had been introduced when the Nazis took over, a lot of those architects left. And so a number of them landed in Harvard. And you had Walter Gropius became the dean in Harvard. Jose Luis Sert became the chairman for a long time. Marcel Breuer taught in Harvard, and actually when Gropius and Breuer started their practice, they were doing houses in New England. But at the same time, and that's what I'm saying, that was one current, and eventually the best of all, which was Mies van der Rohe, was invited to go to the Armour Institute in Chicago. And curiously, the person that introduced him to the lecture was Frank Lloyd Wright, which was surprising. On the other hand, when Frank Lloyd Wright got done with the intro, like Daniel did for me tonight, he left before Mies had a chance to even speak. And actually, years ago, I took a little Frank Lloyd Wright pilgrimage in Wisconsin and Illinois. And in Madison, we went to see this house, was the John C. Pugh house. And it was a while ago, so Pugh was still alive. And I asked him, how was it working with Frank Lloyd Wright? And he said it was extraordinary. He said, I was a GI, I came back from the war, and I went to Frank Lloyd Wright to see whether he would design my house, sure that he would say no. He said, I only have $5,000 to build this house. He said, but Wright did it. But then he said he couldn't find a contractor in Madison who would build it because no one wanted to work with Wright. So Wright's students built the house, and he showed me very proudly the house, everything was built in. But he told me the story, it brings me back to the Bauhaus. So he said he was walking through Madison, and all of a sudden, a couple of students saw him. And Frank Lloyd Wright he was my height, he was not that short. But he had the cape and he had the hat. And the student rushed after Wright and said, you're Mr. Wright, aren't you? Or you're Mr. Wright. And he looked back and he said, yes. And then he said, I'm a student of architecture. I'm a student in Harvard with Professor Gropius. And Wright looked at him and said, no hope for you. And kept on walking. So, but I think what happened with Art Deco is there was a different current, and that's what I'm saying. A lot of what was happening in New York and in Kansas City and in Chicago, that you had a number of architects who were very well aware of what Art Deco was happening in France, particularly in France, and began to do a number of great buildings. And I think a lot of the architects who eventually came down here had seen those buildings in New York. And so these were sort of, baby versions of those buildings. I always have thought they were quite heroic because, I'm sure, and I'm a practicing architect, and I've always tell my students, you can't have a great building without a great client. Maybe Frank Lloyd Wright got away with it, but there's very few like him. So these guys must have come down and convinced these people who were doing seasonal hotels that were not willing to spend all that much money in these buildings. And as we know, the buildings, for some reason, when Fisher and others laid out Miami Beach, the lots are laid out in a strange way. Given that the water, you would think that the lots would be faced parallel to the water, but the lots are narrow facing the water. So there's really, in the hotels, usually 1 or 2 rooms that have a nice view, and the other ones that face an alley unless you're next door. So these poor guys had to say, well, where is my moment? And it was sort of like a billboard on one side, the only side that I can put an elevation on, and maybe the lobby. And then they manage, to do a lot with the little that they had.
And again, the fact that, and again,
There's 2 movements, the 20s and the 30s, but as it began to move further north in Collins, then there was more money. So when you get to the National, there's more money. When you get to, and then the ones from the Eden Rock and all that, even more money. But the ones down here were fairly modest. But what is unique is that if you go to Kansas City, you don't see all these buildings next to each other. And in New York, you might find, great examples, but they are too within an overall city that has a number of other styles. And that's, I think, what makes this area, and thanks to people like you and Miami Design Preservation League that have not, destroyed it as it was in the danger of being destroyed at one point.
Still it.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
but also the structure of all the structures of
left right completely symmetrical on a lot of the buildings and all the oceans.
Well, and the buildings are even, I mean, a lot of the buildings, the structure behind that is wood. I mean, I know that's what the Winter Haven was. So again, it's difficult to maintain. But again, there's been, when I first came to Miami, they were still tearing them down. And again, it's really changed. Again, thanks to MDPL and many others. So really, thank you all for coming. I know it's raining outside. Maybe that's good.